Key Studios. Even if you've never read a visual novel in your entire life, you've at least heard of them, since all their stuff tends to get adapted into some pretty darn popular anime. Day 8 of Z Memories is on Little Busters. Maybe not Key's finest work, nor necessarily the most popular, but it is probably the one I remember most from their lineup. Key Studio is basically a group super popular for making exactly what I said in the title, school Nakiges, with Nakige being a contraction of the words naku to cry, and ge, short for geimu, which is the Japanese loan word for game. I can't say Key Studios invented the term, but they are definitely famous for nearly every game they make following this trend, with a more comedic slice of life whimsical first half, followed by emotional gut punches that leave you crying in a corner. Finally, there's a happy, kind of supernatural true ending should you choose to pursue it. They are famous for making Clanin, Canon, Planetarian, Air, Angel Beats, Rewrite, Charlotte, Summer Pockets recently, and today's topic, Little Busters. Every single one I just mentioned was originally a visual novel, aside from Angel Beats and Charlotte, since Angel Beats later got a visual novel, and Charlotte was never one. Key Studios isn't exactly an underground phenomenon. Everyone who's watched anime has at least heard of Clannad, or more specifically, Clannad After Story, which takes place, I believe, as the second part of Nagisa's route. Angel Beats was also wildly popular. Actually, pretty much everything they make tends to get some sort of buzz or recognition. All of their visual novels tend to have quite similar patterns. A cynic might even say that they just kind of regurgitate the same visual novel over and over, with supernatural deus ex machinas and emotion pandering. While I personally think that is an overly harsh critique of Key, I do think having an exceedingly similar pattern can get a little Regardless, you can't deny that Key products usually have a very high level of polish in their visual novels and their adaptations as well. They are geniuses at making you care about the characters in the game, since that way when the terrible things start to happen, you empathize that much more with them. My first experience with this studio wasn't actually Little Busters, but rather a visual novel called Air. That said, I think Little Busters is a far better experience as a whole, and there's a lot about Air that I just think is done really poorly, which is why I'm not talking about Air this time around. Okay, let's lay down the groundworks for what Little Busters is all about. Little Busters follows the story of Ricky. Rather than beating up punks at Hanazano High, Ricky instead is a depressed kid whose parents died when he was young, leaving him emotionally vulnerable. However, 4 kids calling themselves the Little Busters saved Ricky by inviting him out to play with them in his dark time of need. Fast forward to the second year of high school, where he and the Little Busters are still friends, hanging out, fighting, and going through a normal school life. However, this second year will bring new meetings, new Little Busters, and most importantly, changes to Ricky's ever unchanging days. Right now, before we get any further in this video, I would like to take the time to be honest with all of you. I do not like the high school setting for most visual novels. For one, I'm not in high school anymore, nor do I have any romantic idealizations of what I would like high school to be like. I think this setting tends to lend itself to exceedingly generic situations, which we have seen time and time again, like oh no, peek in the girls' locker room, student console work, sitting in class. I've played a lot of visual novels that have used this setting, and I tend to forget all about them after playing it, or more likely, just end up dropping it. With that said, I think when it comes to high school slice of life drama, Little Busters is one of the best I've played. Sure, it has a high school setting, but the situations Ricky gets into between each route are rather unique, and go beyond just drab school drama. The reason why they're so unique is because in many Key games, routes are actually done by different scenario writers, so they end up being quite distinct from each other. Well, I suppose to be fair, this isn't too bizarre an idea. Most visual novels do have multiple scenario writers, although not all of them have each writer doing a different route. It also helps that the conflicts in the story all start to introduce supernatural elements, which makes things more interesting, but not crazy enough where it becomes a straight up school supernatural action story instead. In the end, the heart of Little Busters is still the characters and the relationships they have with each other, and it's done fantastically. You really get to learn a lot about each heroine as they slowly join up as part of the Little Busters group. While each character certainly has an obvious initial personality, they also have hidden secrets that you only find out about once you play that route. Little Busters is also one of those visual novels where there is a true ending which connects everything together, so it really isn't the kind of story where you just play one route and forget about it. Sure, each individual route is not bad, but the story is only really complete once you get through every route and solve like the underlying mysteries of the game. And it's worth completing too. There's a reason why it has an above 8.5 rating on VNDB currently. It's the kind of story that I think anyone can enjoy, regardless of where you come from or what preferences you have. My favorite heroine before I completed the game was probably Mio, and after completing the game, I'd say Masato hands down. Which is kind of a cop-out answer, but I mean, come on. What's not to love about a muscle man who believes he can bench press his way out of every problem? More than that though, by the end of the visual novel, you really get the feeling that Masato is one of Ricky's truest friends who will stick with him regardless of the bizarre situations they get themselves into. Little Busters isn't just a visual novel, it also has a ton of mini-games. A fighting tournament, a baseball mini-game, each character having their own stats that grow, a shooting gallery, none of which you actually have to participate in if you don't want to, but are all fleshed out little games in their own right, and have significant relevance to the actual story itself. I mentioned this earlier, but if there is one thing Key Studio does well, it's making slice of life stories mixed with hard emotional beats, and Little Busters is no different. Each of the different characters' routes cover a wide variety of situations, none of which are the standard boring affairs, even if a couple of them don't quite make the most sense. Cood's route, from what I remember, was all sorts of weird. Are the Little Busters my favorite group of friends to follow? No, that award potentially goes to the subject of the next day of Z Memories, but I still ended up caring about the Little Busters. While there aren't any characters where I can put my foot down and declare, they're my favorite, I still end up being invested in Ricky and his group of friends, and the hardship they face. I pointed out Masato earlier, but that's really my favorite out of the cast, rather than necessarily one of my favorite characters of all time. Little Busters is also the second release after Clanid, where Key Studios finally had the brilliant decision to drop 18+ scenes from their visual novels, because holy snap. I'm of the opinion that it doesn't matter whether a visual novel is 18+ or not. Most of the best I've played actually do have age content in them. However, I do think that a lot of visual novels have 18+ elements that are entirely unnecessary to the story. When you have 18+ scenes and they are actually integral to the plot in a way that makes sense, that's really cool. They're actually serving as a plot device. Or I guess you could just dump them in there randomly, which is what you see in stuff like Fate Stay Night. But you know what? Even then, that's just like, whatever, sure. Seems weird overall, but it's harmless. If you enjoy it, great. If you don't, skip it. What I cannot stand, however, is when I feel that the 18+ content is actively detrimental to the plot, which is how I feel every time Key Studio does it. Air and Canon both had it, and it is so badly done. It's usually placed in the climax of the emotional moment of the story, where tensions are rising, the situation is looking more grim than ever. Then bam, suddenly we have to read through about 6 minutes of really bad dialogue, which they then proceed to pretend like it never happened right after it ends, and they try to pick up the emotional moment they just dropped on the floor. Thankfully, Key Studios learned their lesson, and both Clanid and Little Busters didn't have any of that. Then they released a new version later called Little Busters Ecstasy, which added in 18+ scenes into the base game, and yes, they were entirely out of place. Years later, they then released a Perfect Edition, which basically had the 3 new routes, but didn't have the 18+ scenes in the game, which is also the version used for the English translation on Steam. Look, what I'm trying to say is that if you did not want to play the English version of Little Busters because they translated the version without 18+ content, please do not let that be the reason that stops you from playing it. I get it. People are always up in arms against cut content. If I played a game and I knew there was something missing from a release I was currently playing, it would bug me too. But sometimes in a visual novel, the 18+ content was just kinda added because why not? For a story like Little Busters, at its best, it might as well not be there, and at its worst, it's actively detrimental to the visual novel itself. So this time around, I'm thankful that they chose to translate the version without it. Again, that is not always the case, but for this time, yes. As to those 3 new routes, they're decent. They managed to add 3 routes that are completely distinct from the original 6, and the true ending that's already present. Futaki Kanata's route ends up rather dark, with a plotline similar to something that happens in, well, Any darker visual novel where twins are involved. Yeah, I think that's a good enough description. Sasasagawa Sasami's route is complete garbage, basically a joke route, and Tokida Saya's route is kinda weird, where instead of playing a school life visual novel, you end up playing a dungeon crawler complete with bad ends, where Riki gets murdered through various means, making this the route where Riki dies the most in the entire game, yet is probably the goofiest one by far. You would think this is the first time Key Studios did something like this, but nope. Tomoyo's after story from Clannad actually had a dungeon crawling RPG portion of it after you completed it, I believe. It might sound like I'm making it up, but you're seeing footage of it right now. I had planned to do a video on Little Busters for a long time now. Unfortunately, Key Studios likes to make it hard to do it on YouTube, so cross my fingers and hope this one turns out fine. If you haven't already played Little Busters and you are interested in visual novels at all, I recommend you go grab it on Steam right now. It's a really solid story all around, and it just goes to show how when you make your audience care about your characters enough, you really can just throw them in whatever setting you want and it'll still be good. At this point, you can consider today's Z Memory finished. However, I still want to talk about some spoilers so we can just, again reminisce about some moments in the game that stood out to me. So if you haven't already played it, again, close this video now and go give it a shot. I saw that Summer Pockets got translated on Steam super recently, so that's cool and a little surprising, so you can check that out too, I suppose. I haven't actually finished playing that one myself, but knowing Key Studios, it's probably good. Like, subscribe, notification buttons, and Twitter, all that is there as always. Now that the good boys and girls are gone, spoiler time. Little Busters is full of fun moments. I even went through the entire minigame portion the first time I played it, which I don't recommend anyone to fully complete them. It's a fun side distraction, and the game does a tremendous job tying these quirky minigames as part of the main storyline, where the Little Busters are training Riki and Rin for the future ahead of them. However, actually completing the baseball minigame and the fighting minigame was a surprisingly hard task, and the payoff you get is basically a pat on the back, so not really worth completing. Little Busters has one really big twist, which forms the core of the game and the true ending, and I think it's really well done. With the big twist being that the world the Little Busters takes place in is actually a construct made by the members of the Little Busters, aside from Riki and Rin, to prepare the two of them for a world after all of them are gone, where in reality, everyone is actually on the brink of death after a fatal bus accident. They managed to hide foreshadowings throughout the 5 original routes of the game, so that when you finally get to the big reveal, it's easy for the audience to look back and go, oh, so that's why that happened. There are other visual novels like the Zero Escape series, where I feel as if the focus of the game was to make a crazy enough twist that the audience didn't see it coming. Little Busters, on the other hand, I felt as if the twist came rather naturally, and served to tie the entire story, full of little supernatural events, quite well. I actually did check out a tiny bit of the ecstasy version of Little Busters. One, I didn't want to make the statement that I think the 18+ additional content in Little Busters was terrible blindly. 2, of course I was curious to know how it would fit into this visual novel, considering the fact that I felt there was really no place for it. And to my shock and awe, I found out that, yeah, they're out of place, which isn't really a surprise considering they were literally tacked on to what was already a complete base story. On another note, doesn't the existence of these 18+ scenes make the true ending super weird? Since even though they're all like best of buds or whatever now, they also all boned Riki during this whole dream world whatever thing, and didn't they retain those experiences after Riki saved everyone? Wasn't it supposed to be like a heartfelt tale of friendship between this group of friends? Anyways, as for something nice to mention about this release, I thought the menu design was a lot sleeker. Definitely prefer it over what they end up doing for the English version. What else? Oh yeah, I thought the beginning portion of the true ending was probably one of my favorite parts, where Riki has to slowly reunite all of the Little Busters after they disbanded due to Kyosuke vanishing. It's a great representation of how Riki's experiences with all the different heroines and all the different paths he has taken in this world has really changed him. How he's grown up beyond the helpless boy he was in the past, and now Riki can stand on his own 2 feet now. It shows that all the effort his friends have done for him have not been wasted, and instead of only following behind, he can now be the one that leads as well. The game has subtly showed this with how Ricky's and Rin's base stats in the minigames actually increases after each route is completed. However, Ricky bringing everyone together is the big moment, and it does feel earned. I also liked Ricky's fight with Masato, who goes crazy and sees everyone as Masato. It was an incredibly surreal moment, as if we jumped into a completely different genre. Cannot say I was expecting it, I must admit. And the biggest highlight moment goes to, of course, the finale of the true ending. The moment where Ricky and Rin plays catch with Masato, Kengo, and Kyosuke. As they slowly disappear one by one is an incredibly poignant scene. Seeing them all give their individual farewells is a tearjerker, how they acknowledge that Ricky and Rin have finally grown up enough to stand up on their own. And it is finally time to bring this long dream to an end.
そんなの俺の方が嫌に決まってんだろ。なんでお前らを置いていかなきゃいけないんだよ。俺だってお前たちといてえよ。ずっといたかったんだよ。
Bringing it back to the baseball that brought both the new Little Busters and the original group together in the first place was a super nice bookending touch as well. Then, we can't forget the big damn hero moment where Ricky and Rin return back to the real world and using their newfound experience of not being useless and bad at communication saves everybody from the bus explosion. One might say that this ending where everyone is saved seems like they just kinda did it so that they could have a happy ending, but screw it. I like happy endings and it's quite nice to see, especially after all the hardship Ricky has suffered through every route. And yeah, that about wraps it up. That's all I got. I didn't mention everything. There is the fan disc Cood Wafter, which follows an after story for Cood, which was my least favorite route by a landslide, so I didn't end up playing it. And there was an hour-long mini-story bundled with the Blu-ray disc of the anime, which I heard was whatever. As far as Little Busters though, I think that about covers my feelings about the visual novel. And with that, Day 8 of Z Memories is now officially done. As always, the like button is down there if you enjoy the content. Twitter handle will be on the center of the end screen if you want to see what I'm up to in between videos. Subscribe if you want to support me. And hit the notification and all buttons if you want to keep up to date when the next Day of Z Memories comes out, which will be on what is straight up my favorite high school comedy visual novel series. Thanks for sticking around as always. If you missed Day 8 on the Taerumono sequels, links are on top, and the bottom will be something key related. See you next time.